Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year and welcome to our first Cafe Muse poetry reading of 2021. Thank you, Michael Davis, for sharing your wonderful classical guitar performance. I'm Susan Oki and I'm hosting the reading tonight along with our series founder, Karen Alanier, and my co-host, Ellen Cole. Our technical guru and fellow co-host, Henry Crawford, is behind the scenes. We're proud that Cafe Muse is entering its 23rd year of outstanding literary programs. Our featured poets tonight are Don Colburn and Lesley Wheeler. I will introduce Don and Ellen will introduce Lesley. We encourage you to buy our featured authors' books tonight and to donate to Cafe Muse to support our literary programs. You can find the links for buying books and for making a donation in our chat. You may notice that audience members have been muted. This will help prevent feedback problems for our readers and ensure uninterrupted programming. Please bear with us if we do encounter a technical glitch. During the reading, you may use the chat to comment or to ask a question that our readers may answer during the question and answer period, moderated by Karen Alanier, if time permits. Our program is scheduled for 1 hour. Our next Cafe Muse reading will take place on Monday, February 1st, and will feature poets Lindsay Lesby and Carolyn Matthews. I'll now introduce our first reader. My friend Don Colburn came to poetry late and unexpectedly in the midst of a journalism career. As Aaron Burr says in Hamilton, I was in the room where it happened. Don was my fellow medical reporter at the Washington Post, and one day he announced that he was taking a partial leave of absence from his reporting job to allow him to enroll in the 2-year low residency program at Warren Wilson College and obtain an MFA in poetry. This news befuddled his fellow journalists, but it impressed me since I'd never heard of such a writing program and was amazed that the newspaper had agreed to his proposal. I believe his studies opened him up not only as a poet, but as a reporter. More than most writers in any genre, Don has a deep capacity for empathy. When he tells a story, he's inside the characters, feeling what they feel. In the poems in his most recent collection, you may hear how he's able to inhabit a refugee child in Syria, an airline passenger facing imminent death, even one of the oldest beings alive on the planet, a bristlecone pine. A longtime reporter for the Washington Post and the Oregonian, Colburn was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing. He has published 5 collections of poems, including 4 chapbooks. All 5 won or placed in national manuscript competitions. His poems have appeared widely in literary journals and anthologies. His latest collection, Mortality with Pronoun Shifts, won the 2018 Kathy Smith Bowers Poetry Award. Tomorrow, too, the Brenda Monologues is a sequence of poetic monologues based on the true story of a young woman facing breast cancer while pregnant, a story he first reported in the Oregonian. His full-length book of poems, As If Gravity Were a Theory, won the Cider Press Book Award. His poem, The Thing About Perfection, won the 2020 Ruth Stone Poetry Prize, awarded by Hunger Mountain, the magazine of the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Other writing honors include the Discovery the Nation Award, the Finishing Line Press Poetry Prize, and 5 Pushcart nominations. He lives in Portland, Oregon with Nell, his wife of 50 years, where they are avid hikers, cross-country skiers, and members of the traditional Irish music scene. Friends, please welcome Don Colburn.
Thank you, Susan. It's an honor to be introduced by Susan Oki, who was such a great colleague at the Washington Post, and as she said, became a friend. And now, how cool is it that we're colleagues in a different realm of poetry? And it's an honor to read with Lesley Wheeler. I'm expecting poems, but you know, with Lesley, you just don't know because she's written in every genre known to the language. So we'll have to see. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy better year. And some of you haven't seen me in a while, so I want to say right away, I'm fine. because I know that my brother in Delaware and my sister in New Hampshire right now are freaking out and probably on the phone to each other saying, what the heck happened with Don's head? I'm fine. I just haven't had a haircut in a year, okay? And thank you all for coming to this strange platform. Can I say that? Zoom is still a little weird to me, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it, the distance and the intimacy, but I will say, let's give it its due. It allows us to do this, to gather, even at great distance, like now. And we need that. So cheers for that. And here goes, all the way from an undisclosed location in Portlandia. I'll begin with one that has more of a year-end feel, I think, than a year beginning feel. And it's in memory of that fine, fine Irish writer, William Trevor. Ginkgo on 19th. End of November, end of what Auden Shirley would call a low, dishonest year. My legs and meds are working well enough to walk the neighborhood while a cold rain holds off. Most of the leaves down, stuck to the sidewalk with old rain. They'll never dry out, never skitter. The piles in the street are soggy bran. But right there, on the other side of 19th, a little ginkgo stands out, brilliant yellow, its leaves holding on, or is it the tree holding on? Another imponderable that won't change the subject this ordinary afternoon, this dark time. I think of the ordinary stories you told, how lovely and sad they became without need of symbols, how you believed in not quite knowing, and how there is always, always, as you said in a made-up true story, a little more to it than that. I'm going to read 7 or 8 poems, so if you're counting, that means 6 or 7 to go. A few old ones, a few new ones, and a few from this latest book that Susan mentioned, and I don't even know, because this is Zoom, whether you can even see this, but Mortality with Pronoun Shifts. Here's an old one. Indulgence. Awesome, she said as soon as I spoke a few words for coffee. Can I get your name? Don, I said. D-O-N. And felt stupid for spelling it out until she said, cool. It was raining, and my desk job 3 blocks away, 4 stories up. So I said, make that extra hot. And she said, no worries. How's your day so far? Okay, I mumbled. And she said, right on. Anything else with that today? I was about to say no thanks, but my eye caught on the bouquet of biscotti and I pointed to the ginger one. Excellent. Your total comes to $3.50, which is ridiculous for a small paper cup of steamed milk and a biscuit to stir it with, but I counted out 3 ones, a quarter, 2 nickels, a dime, and 5 pennies, and she said, perfect. My drink was on the bar. 8-ounce extra hot, skinny, no whip, 1 pump mocha for Dan. And I carried it out into the cold rain, the awesome unsung day. One evening we were having dinner with friends, and one of them, a writer, asked me why I write. Except she was a little unfair about it. She gave me this rule. I had to answer in 1 word. It didn't go well. And of course, I thought more about it later and what I should have, would have, could have said. And the result is this poem, which is a little different. So bear with me. One word or less. Why do you write? Good question. Error. Answer exceeds allowable word count. Jeez. Thought you were kidding about the one word. Give me a minute to think out loud. Don't start counting yet. How about memory? No, too vague. Or curiosity? Nah, too all-purpose, too obvious. Mortality? Too grandiose, too woo-woo. Clarify? Getting warmer. Verbs do that. If I were allowed to go way over the limit and revise, which for me is the best part, I'd say something about how writing helps you find answers to vexing questions like this one. Gives you a momentary grip on the world before it slips free and you start over. There's a word for this, a noun, maybe a verb. I just can't come up with it now. Sometimes it helps to change the subject. So here's one for you. Are you sure it's less and not fewer? Never mind. I'd stick with less. Nobody says fewer is more. Less has more juice, more purchasing power. And wait, hold on. Purchase. I love that word purchase. I don't like to buy things, but I love that word purchase. And by the way, if you're wondering why I appear to be reading poems in a motel room, it's because I sort of am. Short answer, our home internet speed upgrade got delayed by COVID and the holidays. And so here I am, social distancing. Why I read obituaries. I listen for a distant bell, even when the name is one I couldn't come up with. Today it was Bruce Langhorne, 78. His right hand missing 2 fingers and much of a thumb, blown off by homemade fireworks when he was 12, which didn't keep him from taking up guitar and learning so well he played with Dylan and Baez, Lightfoot and Rush. From the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he performed with Odetta before 250,000, the day Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream." There were folk rock gigs in Hollywood and a mid-career swerve to Hawaii, where he grew macadamia nuts. Diabetes inspired him to cook up organic low-sodium salsa he sold as Brother Brew Brew's hot sauce. Death is the one news hook, late or soon, we all achieve. But an obit needs a better reason to tell its story. Mr. Langhorne's goes back to 64, when he walked into the recording studio carrying an enormous Turkish drum with bells. And Dylan, in that jingle jangle morning, he came following to sing a song for us. Another old one from our time in Washington, D.C., and a place that I know most of you, many of you have visited, down on the Mall. Veterans Day night at the War Memorial. All along the glassy black wide angle, they look away and back. Some carry candles or white carnations. A woman reaches to grave rub a block from 67 onto a page of her brochure. It prints like a darkroom photograph. Odd how we abstract a thing, a war, to make it real. A wall of losses. Down the slow line, I find myself staring at a man ambushed by a name. He's in old boots and fatigues, cap in his hands, balding, paunchy, grizzle-cheeked, about my age. He can't stop looking down at his boots, the litter of medals. Can't stop sobbing in bursts, his face clenching and unclenching like a fist or a heart. I might have been that man, or either of us become a chiseled stone. Years ago, I came to this mall to march with thousands, easy as it was to leave the war to strangers such as these, the one here now, and one he sees and doesn't see. I haven't written many new poems during this time of pandemic and unrest and loss, but here's one. It's in a form called a villanelle, which has an intricate pattern of rhymes and repeated lines. Now here's the thing about a villanelle. It has 19 lines, but because of all the repetition, if you can come up with 2 lines, you've already got 8 of the 19 done. So you're halfway, you're almost halfway there. The bad news is that you're now stuck with those 2 lines being repeated over and over again, and that can be trouble. But I felt the wish, the need to write something about George Floyd's killing. And I decided to try a formal poem as a way of sort of distracting myself from the sheer difficulty. Onlookers at 38th and Chicago, in memory of George Floyd. Before George Floyd, I always found a way with someone on the news about to die to close my eyes or turn and look away. But I have watched his death gasp ricochet the world. Can't turn my head, hard as I try, each time before George Floyd passes away. He doesn't pass away. They kill him, splayed face down beside the right rear tire, his eyes ablaze with terror, calling mama, airway choked off, cop kneeling on his neck, no way to turn his head. 3 men in blue stand by. Before George Floyd, they always found some way to say the dead man was a threat to put away for good. Can't breathe, his hoarse whisper, a cry to officers who look and look away. Onlookers all, we can't outrun his why. Bystanders, no excuse for standing by. George Floyd, dying, showed us another way. He could not close his eyes or look away. 2 more. Here's another poem of witness, a monologue, and it started with an image that you all, I'm pretty sure, saw about 12 years ago, almost to the day. In the unlikely event of a water landing, U.S. Airways Flight 1549. When the pilot told us to, I couldn't take my glasses off and put my head down between my knees. I wanted to watch to the last moment before smithereens. Closing your eyes won't help, not like in music. The eerie part wasn't death touching down early, but how quiet it was, how smooth. We were gliding. The buzz and rumble of engines gone, and I could hear everything. The crying, less than you think. Hail Marys, the man up front trying against the rules to call home. An old woman many rows back sang beautifully in Spanish. Maybe to God. I don't speak that language. I wish I had known they called the captain Sully, and how Sully was a glider pilot too. We had no idea why it was happening, no inkling of geese or gulls, but we were losing altitude, and the quiet sounded terribly wrong. After we banked left, Sully brought us down easy onto the river. The trick is to ride the thickening air down slow and plow into the water, head up like a duck. Not to nosedive, jackknife, cartwheel, burn. When we didn't die, some panicked. Suddenly there was time and ice water sloshing at our ankles, our knees. How long can a heavier than air machine float? Someone named Josh knew to knock the door out over the wing. I didn't notice the guy carrying his garment bag or the lady screaming for her shoes. I just remember getting pushed toward a hole in the side of the plane and tumbling out into the cold, gray, blinding afternoon, which held me. I came to my feet on the submerged wing with the others, and we walked on water. Finally, this, which I'll dedicate tonight to my sister Joanne, who lives with her husband Dick up in New Hampshire, where this poem takes place. Along Mink Brook, early spring. The locals have laid down bets on when the thick lake ice will break up, and here already the creaking and cracking make way for slow, dark water. A raft of ice drifts upstream, a smooth white sail, wind winning for a while against water on its long downfall to the sea. The day after the funeral, we walk out into the cold light of this earthly world, which goes on, unmoved by our need to name it. I'm an amateur, thumbing through my Audubon, trying to keep up, sidetracked by names. I rejoice in them all. The Phoebe Joanne just spotted, her first of the season. The kingfisher going berserk across the water. Juncos, flickers, chickadees, crows, common mergansers, rare somewhere. And out by the ice floe, the ring-necked gull, which has no ring around its neck. Then the song sparrow, the one I couldn't see in the brushy white pine, flies out, lights on a willow shoot, and sways in silhouette against watery light. A dusky little nameless bird until it sings. Thanks for listening, everyone.
John, thank you. Those were beautiful and very moving poems. You read them so well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ellen Cole, one of the Cafe Muse co-hosts, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our next reader, the poet and novelist Lesley Wheeler. Excuse me. Lesley lives in Virginia and is the Henry S. Fox Professor of English at Washington and Lee University. She's a trustee of AWP, an award-winning poet, a literary scholar, a recipient of a Fulbright Scholarship and a fellowship from the National Endowment of the Humanities, among other honors. She's also the poetry editor of the journal Shenandoah, and she has a PhD from Princeton University. Lesley is the author of 5 poetry collections. Her most recent, The State She's In, was published by Tinderbox Collections in 2020, which I can't believe is actually last year. Her debut novel, Unbecoming, was also published in 2020 by Aqueduct Press. Her other poetry collections include Radioland, published by Barrow Street, The Receptionist and Other Tales, published by Aqueduct, Heterotopia, which was the winner of the Barrow Street Poetry Prize, Heathen, published by C&R Press, and 2 chapbooks, Propagation and Scholarship Girl. She's also published 2 scholarly books, Voicing American Poetry, Sound and Performance from the 1920s to the Present, and The Poetics of Enclosure, American Women Poets from Dickinson to Dove. Her work has appeared in Barrow Street, Beloit Poetry Journal, Ecotone, Gettysburg Review, Cinnamon Review, Subtropics, Poetry, and many more. Her essay collection, Poetry's Possible Worlds, is forthcoming in 2021 from Tinderbox. Lesley's newest book, The State She's In, lives up to the double entendre in its title, referring both to Virginia, the state the poet lives in, and to the poet's emotional state. This is a book of fierce advocacy for social justice and women's rights, a revelation of Virginia's history and natural landscape, and a tender witnessing of what it's like to be both a parent and a child of parents in a difficult time. The poems, which were written during the 2016 election and the Me Too movement, reflect the outrage of that time. It's political, but not polemic. The poems use natural imagery, anthropomorphism, and delicate, sometimes surreal imagery to create the emotion in her poems. The writing is spare and the images are vivid and beautiful. In a poem titled The South, she writes about coming to live in Virginia from New Jersey, thinking she could stand apart from the state's history of racial hatred, but discovers how profoundly it affects her. She writes, "But malice won't sit where you mapped it, emitting a predictable growl. Stop knowing everything and look around. Here, above your banging pulse, an implicated tune, weathered and blue, voice of land pushed up sore, its grudges cold. Those notes twist down piney slopes, fume into creeks by whose banks the copperhead sun like slippery hieroglyphs. They scrawl a tale that had been camouflaged from you, even as you sang your lines. Now the story holds you in its lap. Now it's poised to strike." I could read you more from Lesley's beautiful poems, but I think it's time for you to hear Lesley herself read them. After Lesley reads, the WordWorks Karen Alanier will lead a Q&A session. So now let me present the wonderful and very accomplished poet, Lesley Wheeler.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, Okay, that introduction made my day. Not only did you make me feel really fancy when I'm sitting in my home office in my stocking feet, but the way that you read my poems, I just feel really grateful for that. Thank you. And I feel really grateful to the whole Cafe Muse team. This is, from a poet's point of view, a very well-run and generous series for which I'm really, really grateful. And to name some people, I probably have missed some names, but Michael Davis's beautiful music. I have to thank Henry for his photography and his Zoom prowess, and Karen and Susan and Ellen and Bergie for all the organizational and promotional work they did. And not least Don for these amazing poems. I want to quote that barista and say, right on. Like, that was a really great reading. And I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to listen to you from 3,000 miles away. I loved the echo of Auden there. That low dishonest year line is so perfect for right now. And it was good to hear. I also loved the riff on the word less, which is what my husband calls me. So it's a word I think about a lot. And I should say too that Henry has very kindly put links to buying the books in the chat, and I went and found the latest chapbook by Don, Mortality with Pronoun Shifts, on the Main Street Rag page, and ordered it during the introduction. So thank you. I'm looking forward to that. I should say too that, like, I love how people can participate in these readings from afar. Of course, the sad thing is that we can't get each other's book signed, which is always a really fun thing about in-person readings. If you at any point feel moved to order my latest, The State She's In, from Tinderbox Editions or elsewhere, I am happy to send you a signed book plate, so just message me. It also occurs to me that that I tend to read in this office with two doors behind me. Door number 1 and door number 2, I realized. If you have a good guess about what is behind each of them, throw it into the chat. Maybe I'll come up with a prize for the best one. All right, so Ellen mentioned that I live in Virginia and that this book is in many ways a book about coming to terms with the complicity involved in living in a place where I denied I was a part of for a couple of decades. You know, it gets a little old after 20-something years, right? You can't really pull that off. But it's a very beautiful place. I'm in the Shenandoah Valley between the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachians, and it's certainly a gorgeous place to be able to take walks during a pandemic, but it's also a really tricky place. Ellen also mentioned my unfortunately named college, the place where I work, Washington and Lee. Both Robert E. Lee and 3/4 of Stonewall Jackson are buried in Lexington, and there are a lot of, I'm just laughing at the first guest behind of the doors. So, you know, it's a complicated place. There's a lot of Civil War tourism, and there's a lot of idolatry of the lost cause. And so that's one of the things I'm thinking about in these poems. I'm going to start with a poem early in the book called Traces. When I moved into this particular house, which is about 100 years old in the middle of town, I kept at night hearing a train whistle and wondering, where are the railroad tracks? And I, you know, walking around and looking for them, and I could never find them until eventually I realized that just a block down from my house is the old railroad station, that there's no train within hearing distance, but there was until the 1950s. I haven't heard it lately, but yeah, I would be really spooked if I did. Traces. Some nights a train rattles past, moaning ghostly, although the segregated station closed 70 years ago. Relocated brick by truck, rails pulled up, ground misted with broken glass. Our road used to lead to the depot. A neighbor used to shiver at her toddler's words. This isn't our house. The ladies in white dresses told me so. Unwilling to accept it, photos slammed their faces down. Once a stranger shaped initials on our foundation. Now ligatures crumble. Once a lilac was planted to ward off spite. Scent resonates even though the blooms are closed. The sweetness says, no house is yours or mine. Despite everyone's claims, the lingering spectral whiteness. Nobody owns this beaded grass, that vanished tree, tulips brooding on sunny days past. The message aches like the whistle of a phantom locomotive or heart of pine floor crying out. On some fraction of an acre, in the half-familiar April rain, protest sounds. This isn't your spring, the nesting mockingbird sings, just a spur you can ride to the real connection. This one was commissioned for a really beautiful anthology, a literary field guide to Southern Appalachia. I was allowed to choose a native plant, and they came up with naturalist descriptions of those plants and illustrations as well. I chose the black walnut tree. Black walnut tree. How do you persist knowing your shadow is poisonous? How do you bear the thirst, driving your taproot through silty clay towards creek or sewer, seeking more and more water? The same power helping you grow strong and straight, heartwood densely grained, leaflets velvet, serrate, it pushes others away. You deep-grooved volunteer, magnificent citizens sickening my yard, I need to learn how to endure my own bitterness. Tell me your tough-shelled fruit, and I will tell you mine as I render the earth unkind. Chemistry of hunger, ambition, bound to harm, whether or not we rue it. One of the things I did when I was sort of working towards this book, it sort of started to germinate in 2015 in the run-up to the last election. One of the things that was happening then is the racism in the area was becoming louder. It was kicking up a lot, and it made me feel like I had a much deeper obligation to learn the history of the place where I was. And one of the things I looked into was the early Native history. It's an area where Monacan Indians still live to some extent, but it was mainly a sort of hunting area, a sort of corridor that people traveled. It wasn't the main settlement. As far as I was able to find out, the first definite settlement on this ground was by a group of enslaved people who had escaped from a plantation in Eastern Virginia, and the settlement did not last long. So this is a poem in 3 parts. I'm going to read the first and the last. The first part, the poem is called Before Lexington, and the first part is called Unremembered Settlements. Vapor stole from the Maury River, droplets deflecting light, before this town was hammered out. Algonquins and Iroquois hunted in it, voices muffled by clouds, words dissolved among other, older words, until they sold the right, or that's how governors told it. Fog softened the land, made it seem kind. Maroons stealing themselves and their kin fled to it from eastern plantations. Built tree-bough dwellings here with liberated tools, sowed salvaged corn, sang in languages forgotten since by heron and crow. The river a mercy, the mountains a shield. Not a pottery shard remains of them, not a nail. Mist assisted when militia came to kill their leader, forced the others back through passes in the Blue Ridge, then lifted its innocent hands. Whiteness will not save you. Warm water lifting into cold air erases always. This place, this shine, wants you to forget. The middle section of this poem is an erasure, and the last short section is just 12 words or so, a little more than that left after the erasure. It's called Unsettled. Stolen, deflected, muffled, dissolved. Tell what seemed mercifully forgotten. This shine remains yours and mine by force, erasure, theft. I thought, I mean, a lot of us are thinking about Georgia tomorrow, right? I thought I should read a poem with some voting in it. This one is called State Roads, and it's a form I became fascinated with in the last few years. It's a haibun, so it starts with a prose description and ends with something like a haiku, kind of crystallizing something that was going on in the earlier part of the poem. This one's called State Roads. One route is Lee Street, named for Robert E., past the antebellum mansions and three-story pines, polishing brick pavements with your boot soles, past the magnolia older than bees and shining hard, its branches a hoop skirt or cave for rage, past the only post office in the country not labeled post office because the locals loathe the feds as they still do, with or without raising a battle flag. Or consider a dirtier, unsanctioned path between Catholic church and frat house, lined by dumpsters, past food service guys smoking on the loading dock, near the constricted concrete steps leading to the clinic, preferable not for what some call grit, but because the mud tells who has trudged that way, plus it keeps accepting signatures. Today, late snow gagged the daffodil mouths, but they kept yelling. There's a sequence in the book that was written during that fall of the 2016 election. And this is one from October 2016. It's called Credit. It's from a long ago moment you probably remember when we could stand online at the supermarket and chat with people. And it was also the day of the town hall that was right after those Trump tapes were aired where he talked about grabbing women by the pussy. So a very fraught moment. Credit. Put this on her tab, jokes the mayoral candidate ahead online for groceries, waking me from daydreams about a free-range chicken roasting at home, good bread and greens. I laugh generously, ask if he'll watch the debate tonight. Exchanging words, each coin stamped with a chord about the world and passed back warm until he wheels off. My turn. Soon to be mine Chardonnay and Garnacha, 6 bottles for the discount. The cashier surprises me too. Who do you think is going to win? I temporize. The town hall? He pauses to key in cilantro. Sure. My mother taught me good manners, meaning no religion, no politics, meaning smile, meaning make people comfortable, never hungry, never ashamed. My books taught me to speak, that silence is disrespect, that it costs us all. Well, I keep waiting for Trump to cancel it. He's had such a bad weekend. Slow and calm, passing granola across the scanner, a substantial man, he returns, I don't think so. Now we are both trapped in a relation that serves neither. Troubled, perhaps he'll be in trouble with his manager. Anyone could hear this. Yet, I insist, he said such terrible things. The cashier, to his credit, does not shrug. All men talk like that, he says, all men but God. And next I know I'm defending men. Not all. I know men who are shocked, as if men need my comfort. And perhaps he sees me then, filmed by a bubble of womanly innocence, soap sheen reflecting protective dollar signs, while also mirroring with distortion his own face. Kroger card, he asks, and sorry, I answer, dictating my digits, inserting a silver flag in the chip reader, paying with imaginary money for actual food, wondering which of us ought to be kinder, knowing his feet must ache, his hands look raw, but feeling like dirt, like a pussy, to cash that word in, to be grabbed or judged not fit for grabbing, disgusting, forked, breastfeeding, bleeding holder of unwelcome opinions, as I take my wealthy self back to a job where I serve women and men who at least pretend to value me, although I don't pretend to know what that's worth. Slightly more cheerful one about watching the Panda Cam, which I was doing for a while some years ago. And I went down one of those rabbit holes. Sometimes those of you who write poems probably know what I mean, that I started researching the history of copulating pandas in captivity and learned some things about how that was not really happening very effectively at the National Zoo. Feeling Good, it's called. Maybe they get off that way, although the posture can't result in a baby panda, Meijang flat as half-melted snow during this one fertile day per year, rump too low for Qianqian's access, so he climbs up her foothills and stands on her back, triumphant. Sexually inventive zoologists built a platform in the bear's favorite candlelit bamboo grove, hoping she'd trip and land at an inviting angle, and holy romance she did. But chivalrous Qianqian lifted her, she pancaked alluringly, and he posed on her back again. The keepers sighed like spring wind through pine needles. All the keepers, yours and mine, are sighing. Today, on PandaCam 1, a two-tone sleeper in a dim enclosure. Nose almost touches knees. Belly rises, belly sinks. A midnight paw twitches like my own hand on the pillow. Click a link and see the other half reclined against a painted backdrop of mountains. He or she gnaws at leafy shoots, thinking of obduracy and desire. There are many pleasures, most of them stupid. Fullness, oblivion, the view from another animal's shoulders or low down in the dew, when every furry particle yields to gravity's persistent, gives up, gives out, gives in. Like Don, I'm going to read a new poem from the pandemic year and then close with one from the book. This was published by Thrush in September, and it's a poem I wrote last April. I bet a lot of you were having the same experience, which was, horror and terror, but at the same time, being just amazed at the natural world coming to life and how beautiful that could be, as if we weren't, the human world wasn't in complete catastrophe. So this is a short poem from that moment. It's called Tone Problem. Low down ground by the stream acts joyful. Bluebells, trillium, get out of town with your frilled carillon. Pink moon, grass moon, egg moon, there's no call to fling brilliance in this of all springs. I can't even with such beauty, can't explain to the sweet-breathed lilac. No words for love-crazed blue jays, for the cat slinking through lemon balm. Calm down, iridescent mist, swept along by always rising winds. The nerve, the outrageous auxiliary verb, maybe. I'm really looking forward to this next spring and hoping it feels better for us all. The last poem is the poem I've always been closing with from this book, and I keep hoping it's going to be obsolete, and yet it is not yet. It's a spell, and it has a participatory element. The poem has 3 blanks in it, 3 blank underlinings. I'm going to read them, and I'm going to say blank. During the first 2, I'd like you to think about someone who you would like to banish from the known universe, or even just from your attention. Anyone you'd like to get rid of. And for the very last blank, I'd like you to think about something delicious. So thank you again for being a wonderful audience, and I'm so looking forward to catching up on your speculations in the chat. All-purpose spell for banishment. A pox on blank and the gerrymander he rode in on. Expel, export, exile him while we smudge sage smoke around. At the 0 hour, as our wombs contract under the moon, cast him out. Groper, loomer, cheater, rapist, harassing mogul, bully, frilled narcissus of a boss. Evict without visa. Dissolve his assets and social media accounts. Let there be no comb-over strays stranded on sofa backs, no despotic perfume. Erase his name even from rumor, from amygdala. Remove all dimples left in moss by cloven loafer. There is no blank. There never was. As the last syllable of this incantation sounds, it breaks over us how light we feel, like lemon mousse in a silver dish on an early spring morning before the leaves grow in, each cell of foam trapping nothing but sugar and sunshine. On our tongues, only blank. Thank you.
Lesley, I want to thank you on behalf of the whole Cafe Muse team. And I want to thank Don for that wonderful reading as well. And Ellen and Susan for your introductions, and Henry, of course, for your intrepid work behind the scenes. And I have one question. We don't really have very much time left, but we'll see what we can work with. And I want to throw this out here because I think you both can answer it, even though I'm using one word, Lesley, that may not be exactly in your ken. But I think I'd like to hear you speak to the intersection of poetry and journalism. And I wanted to ask Don how many times he was asked if he was in that plane that Sully was flying. You need to unmute, Don.
Well, I have been asked a lot, and I like that. That doesn't get old. Because if anybody even thought for a moment that I was on that plane, I take that as a good sign for how the poem worked. I wasn't. That's one difference between journalism and poetry. You can lie in poems, or embellish, or pretend, or get into someone else's life and voice, and that's what I tried to do. I borrowed almost all of the details. I didn't make up the details of that poem, by the way. So I just borrowed them mostly from, yes, the newspaper. I devoured stories about that, and I didn't make it up. I mean, there was a woman singing in Spanish, and there was a guy texting, and the kid who pushed the door out over the wing was Josh. So I don't easily make stuff up, but I can make from as a poet. That's one difference.
Lesley, what do you think?
I don't have the amazing journalistic cred of Don, but I also, it was as soon as I got deeper into his words, and I realized that, you know, we were an interesting pairing because we're both working so much from the news and thinking about how, you know, the traditional subject matter of poetry, the natural world and the spirit, how you can't separate it all. You can't pretend you also don't live in a world with politics and complicated power dynamics, and, you know, that all of these things come together in your work necessarily. I guess maybe one thing that I was thinking about as you spoke, Don, was that that I wouldn't necessarily make a truth claim about everything in my poems. There were many, like that poem Credit about the guy on the checkout line. Yeah, it was all literally true, but there were also lots of poems where I was thinking about a history that that is not entirely accessible anymore, and trying to imagine, you know, doing my research and doing archival research even, but, you know, but also being so aware of what we don't know and what we can't clearly witness and testify to. I think poetry is actually a good form for that, because it makes space for the gaps, even just in the line breaks on the page or the way that poems are laid out. There's room for what we don't know, as well as all the really important stuff that we need to bear witness to. I don't know. Was that an answer? This is close.
That's a very good answer. And I think you both had interesting answers in your own separate ways. I think it's been an exceptional reading tonight. If anybody on the Cafe Muse team saw anything that was in the chat that I might have missed, Susan, did you see anything?
There's a question here from Anna for both, if there's time for this. How, in your opinion, do poets across generations inform each other's craft? So I guess that's looking back to our forebears and our teachers. Anybody has?
Yikes. I would say, I don't know, except to say that they do. I hope they do, at least in the direction of us here now reading and learning from people long ago. In that writing program that Susan mentioned that we both ended up in, I never would have dreamed or believed that I would end up being a big fan of John Keats from 200 years ago, who, you know, died at 25, but I did, and I still am a fan of John Keats, and I got into his poems via the letters, which I'd recommend to everyone. And I know I'm not dissing the poems, but the letters are amazing and read to me as if they were written to me now, right here. And that's the miracle of these words that go across generations or even centuries, I think, is that they're speaking to us. I don't know if we're speaking to them, but they're speaking to us, and we have so much to learn. And you can't be a writer if you don't read.
Well, I think, Lesley, you have something, you know, something speaking to you in your house, you know, so maybe, you know, the poem about the original people who lived in your neck of the woods, I think goes across all those generations.
Yeah, I would say that everywhere around here is haunted, and I've had a fair number of poets come to campus and say, "This, you know, this place is haunted, right?" And yeah, we've noticed. I would say, I mean, I came to poetry not through the MFA world, but through the PhD, and I teach other poets for a living. So I'm always reading, and I'm always being influenced, sometimes out of admiration and sometimes out of just the sort of omnipresence of another voice in my head. And you know what I was saying before about poetry making a space for gaps, it's also a technology that's meant to connect us mind to mind over not only geographical distance, but time. And so, you know, I would say Emily Dickinson feels present to me. I talk to her all the time. she has answered me on occasion. So yeah, I think it's immensely important. I think we all need each other's words.
Okay, so before we go, let's see what's behind those doors.
Well, I can tell you the one on the right is angry cats that I dare not open it because Lord knows what they will do. The one on the left is my unfinished attic, which is actually a kind of a spooky place. So if there were some much better answers in the chat about yin and yang and the boogeyman and some other things, I'm going to get back to some of you and see what prizes you think you might deserve.
Anyway, well, thank you all so very much. What a wonderful evening and a great way to start the new year, 2021 Cafe Muse online. And I hope you all will come back. You have the calendar. We put the link in the chat. You can save the chat yourself If you like, there's a little dot, dot, dot at the bottom of the chat. And if you go down there and it says save the chat right at the top. So if you want any of those links, that's how you do it. And we are then finished for the evening.